Folks, welcome back to the Anchored Podcast. This is going to be an Anchored Pod like none before. We have two of America's leading public intellectuals, two men who need no introduction, the one and only Dr. Cornel West and the one and only Dr. Robbie P. George. Dr. West, Dr. George, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure.
We thank both you and Sister Kate for having us, and we just thank you for your attempt to keep alive the best of the humanist tradition. It's
We have
very important.
co-hosting with us this episode, special guest co-host, CLT Chief of Staff, Katie Prefontaine. Katie's going to do a more formal introduction. I think our audience, Katie, knows these names, but it's good to remember how much these men have accomplished. I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, as Jeremy said, two people who do not need any introduction, but we do want to make sure that we give those introductions as they are incredible. So today we have Dr. Cornel West. He is a Dietrich Bonhoeffer Professor of Philosophy and Christian Practice at Union Theological Seminary. He is also class of 1943 Professor of African American Studies, emeritus at Princeton University. He is a magna cum laude graduate of Harvard College and obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. Professor West is best known for his classics Race Matters and Democracy Matters. His memoir is entitled Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. He made his film debut in The Matrix and was the commentator on the official trilogy released in 2004. He has made several spoken word albums, including Never Forget, collaborating with Prince, Jill Scott, Andre 3000, Bootsy Collins, and others. In 2021, he won a Grammy along with Arturo O'Farrell for the year's Best Latin Jazz Album. Professor West has a passion to share and keep alive the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and justice. We are also joined by Dr. Robert P. George. He is a McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. He has served as Chairman of the U.S. Commission of International Religious Freedom and on the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights and the U.S. President's Council of Bioethics. He was a judicial fellow at the U.S. Supreme Court, where he received the Justice Tom C. Clark Award. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Swarthmore, he holds degrees of JD and MTS from Harvard University and the degrees of DPhil, BCL, DCL, and DLit from Oxford University. He is a recipient of the U.S. Presidential Citizens Medal and the President's Award for Distinguished Teaching at Princeton University, and he is of counsel to the law firm Robertson and McElway and member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. It's a mouthful, it's just so amazing. Such accomplished individuals to be able to talk to today.
Thank you, Katie.
I would love to just start out. I think as a reader of Truth Matters, I was just wondering this, and so I imagine other readers would wonder, you guys have such an amazing friendship, and I'm wondering if you feel like that was more born out of both of you having, wanting to hone your own skills and be aware of your weak points, and so you seek out individuals who differ from you so that you can become better intellectually, or if what really was the root of your friendship was finding the similarities that you had so that you could have the trust to be able to have these really difficult conversations that you guys disagree about. I would love to just start out there. If this is rooted in finding similarities or seeking out differences.
I think
it's a wonderful question. You want to jump right in, Brother Robbie?
Sure, let me give it a shot, Cornel, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Indeed. Well, I first just want to begin by saying it's always a blessing to be in conversation with my dear brother Robbie. He just had his mother's funeral, so we want to keep him in our prayers and him in our hearts and minds. And Sister Katie, this is the first time I met you, but me and Brother Jeremy, we've been in trouble together. We've been in trouble. We've written together and we worked together, and a lot of people wonder how it could be, in fact, that we end up working. We say, well, no, indeed, that no school of thought, no ideology has a monopoly on the Socratic legacy of Athens or the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, that we can agree and disagree at deep levels and still revel in each other's humanity. And of course, that's what it is with me and Brother Robbie, because Brother Robbie and I are much more than friends. We are very, very deep brothers. We're family, and it will remain that way because our love is not reducible to politics. and our respect for
Amen.
each other is not reducible to me pointing out when he's wrong and he pointing out when I'm wrong. So I
Yeah,
think it
very
has to do
much
with
so true.
integrity. That Brother Robbie is a person of integrity, honesty, and decency. He says what he means what he says. He's reliable and trustworthy in terms of where he is. And even when we have our agreements, political agreements, ideological agreements, we've got a common humanity that we don't apologize for.
Amen. Yeah, thank you, Brother Cornell. Katie, here's my crack at your question. It is certainly true that Cornell and I share an openness to challenge, to criticism, to engaging with people with whom we disagree. But behind that is something more fundamental. And that's the thing that our whole relationship began with and is based on, and that is a love of truth. Both Cornell and I want to get to the truth of things. That's why we went into this business. If we weren't dedicated to getting at the truth of difficult matters, of philosophy, of religion, great questions, if we weren't interested in getting at the truth of those things, we'd go get respectable jobs selling insurance or cars or something like that. The reason we have dedicated ourselves to lives of scholarship and teaching is because we're dedicated to getting at the truth of things. And that creates a powerful bond. The love of truth, the devotion to truth, the recognition that truth is bigger than either of us, the recognition that we're fallible, and therefore, if we love truth, we have to be open to criticism and challenge because we're going to be wrong about some things. The intellectual humility that you've got to cultivate and maintain if you're going to be a genuine truth seeker is something both of us recognize the necessity for and do our best to try to cultivate and to maintain. And we support each other in that. So that's at the very foundation of the bond. It's what brought us together, the love of ideas, the desire to get at the truth of things. And then, of course, as we got to know each other better, began to develop really a deep friendship and brotherhood, I think it became clearer and clearer that the shared Christian faith we have, that shared commitment, that too is a very, very powerful bond. I mean, whatever political, ideological, philosophical disagreements we may have, we're grounded in the proposition that each and every human being, as a creature made in the very image and likeness of God, is the bearer of profound, inherent, and equal dignity. That's the principle of all sound morality. And we share that. Now, of course, how that applies to particular cases, issues, sets of facts, that's often not an easy question. And reasonable people are going to come to different conclusions. And often Cornell and I come to different conclusions. But we remain open to revising our conclusions under the weight of argument and evidence, subjecting them to rational scrutiny. So people sometimes ask, well, do you have trouble getting it? No, we don't. It's because both of us are committed to getting at the truth of things, and we see ourselves in a partnership, a truth-seeking partnership. It's West and George, partners in the truth-seeking business. So I'm not going to get mad at him for something he believes or get angry with him because he challenges something I believe. I know I could be wrong about these things. He knows he could be wrong about these things. We're trying to get at the truth of things. And that's the bond.
So this for me was precisely the most powerful takeaway from the book. And the book actually hits home in a personal way because it forces you to rethink relationships. And I think I'm guilty many times of not working with people that I see differently and trying to get at the truth of things, Dr. George, as you describe, but of trying to persuade that I'm right. And Dr. George, in one of your, the whole book, of course, is a conversation between the two of you. And in one of your parts, Dr. George, you make this case that it's not really like you're trying to persuade. It's that you're trying to get at the truth of things as a team together. And my question is, when most folks are not doing this, it's when we actually do come in contact with each other, folks right and left, it can become hostile really quickly. Very few people take the kind of posture that we're trying to get at the truth of things together on the same team. How do you go about it when the other person is not taking that posture, that it's a team effort? We're both going after the truth of things. How do you get there with someone from a relational perspective?
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question, though, brother. I think you have to be jazz-like and improvisational and try to find what the hook is in a person. Um, Someone who is already so polarized in regard to allowing you to speak your truth and invite you in. You got to find something about their experience and in their life where they are truthful. You know, you ask them, yeah, how's your mama doing? And how's your children doing? And tell me stories about them and how are they doing in school. Now that they have to engage in truth telling for that. Yeah. Do you love your mama? Yes, I do. Oh, we got a truth teller here. Now this is interesting. Now you might be voting for Trump. Oh, we got a real fight there, though. No, you love your mama and I love mine too. So we got something really in common here. Let's continue this conversation in such a way that we see where the genuine overlap takes place, and it does take place. And where's the breakdown take place? It does break down. Brother Robbie, he's a follower of Thomas Aquinas. I'm a follower of Kierkegaard. You all remember that wonderful moment in the text from Dostoevsky's letter? If he has to choose between the truth on one side and Jesus on the other, he's choosing Jesus. Well, see, that's irrational. And I'm going with Jesus no matter what. But Robbie believes that Jesus is the truth and the way too. But if Jesus were not the truth and the way, oh, Aquinas is going to have some trouble getting on the other side, but not the Kierkegaardians. We going with Jesus no matter how the truth talk goes. You see, so that in that sense, that's part of the rich tradition. It is not just of the West. We see it in Africa. We see it in Asia. We see it in Europe. It's a universal humanist project of trying to engage in the quest for truth and seeking justice. But we should never be apologetic, though, about our commitment to truth talk, beauty talk, holy talk, goodness talk. All of those things that go into making us the human beings that we are.
I'm afraid that Brother Cornell sometimes despairs of me as a hopeless rationalist.
No. Aquinas, he's got some room. Aquinas has got room for what I'm talking about.
And Cornell will point it out, so I'm going to point it out first that, at the end of his life, Aquinas famously said, looking back on all that he had accomplished in addressing those 10,000 questions, providing the best arguments on the competing sides and trying to resolve them by rational inquiry and deliberation and judgment. At the end of his life, Aquinas, having perceived the beatific vision of God, said of his work, it's all dross, it's all dross. But I do believe in the power of the intellect, and I do believe that we've got to trust our rationality, not uncritically, but the world is fundamentally intelligible to us, and I think that is the fruit of our godlike quality, of our being made in the very image and likeness of God. The world isn't necessarily intelligible to lions and tigers and bears, or to frogs or amoeba, but it is intelligible to us rational creatures. Now, is it completely intelligible? No. And I think if Cornell and I go at it for a while, what'll happen is we'll force each other to modify our positions a bit. I'll have to admit to some absurdity in the universe that I'd want to resist initially, and Cornell would have to maybe admit to a little more intelligibility in
That's
the
true. No,
universe
you're
that a
right.
good
You're right about that,
Kierkegaardian
though,
would
brother.
think is there.
You're right about
But
that.
the title of the book is Truth Matters, a dialogue on fruitful disagreement in an age of division. So let's just look at that title. Our most fundamental claim, our most fundamental proposition, the thing that we do want to persuade our readers of, is that truth really does matter. That there's not just your truth and my truth. Truth is relative, truth is subjective, or it doesn't matter whether you live in line with the truth or live in line with fantasies. No, we believe that truth matters. We believe that it's fundamental to our flourishing as the kinds of creatures we are, rational creatures, creatures made in the image and likeness of God, sharing that divine spark, that rationality. It's essential to our flourishing that we seek the truth, that we prefer truth to fantasy, that we live in a way that is in touch with reality. So, we're pushing a line here. We're pushing an argument. We want people to be persuaded of that. Now, we also want people to recognize their own fallibility. The truth is bigger than any of us. None of us has all of it. All of us have at best a piece of it. And all of us right now are wrong about some things. We have some wrong ideas in our head, some false ideas in our head, every single one of us. But if we love truth, if we're dedicated to truth, then we need to be willing to do what it takes to swap out as many of those false ideas for true ideas. And here's where fruitful disagreement comes in. It's by the engagement of differences of opinion, by being open to being challenged and scrutinized, criticized, open to rational scrutiny, that we have any hope of swapping out some of those false beliefs for true beliefs. If we cut ourselves off from criticism, if we block ourselves from criticism, if we try to shut down the free speech of our critic and not let him criticize us, then we're going to be reinforced in everything we currently believe. Now, we'll be reinforced in the stuff we believe that happens to be true. We're also going to be reinforced in the stuff we believe that happens to be false. And you know what that's going to make us? Ideologues, dogmatists. And those are the opposite of truth seekers. Ideologues and dogmatists are the very reverse of truth seekers. And we don't want to be that. And we don't want people to be that. So we're making a plea to people. Don't be that. Don't be an ideologue or a dogmatist. Now, as Cornel points out, when it comes to rational discourse and fruitful disagreement, it does take two to tango. If someone's unwilling to consider the possibility that he might be wrong, if somebody, as a practical matter, regards himself as infallible, at least on the issues that really matter to him, the deep, cherished opinions that he happens to hold, the identity-forming opinions he happens to hold, I don't know how you can have a conversation. So I don't know how you can get anywhere. You got to somehow break through that. You need the recognition by both sides, both interlocutors, of the possibility that you might be wrong before you can get to that place where you're in a conversation both seeking to learn from each other, not just to preach, but to learn from each other and to deepen understanding. Even if you don't reach agreement, even if you don't end up in the same place, you will find that you will have deeply enriched your understanding of the issue by engaging with an intelligent, truth-seeking person who wants to engage with you.
I love the title. At first when I read it, I was like, "Truth matters. Is this what it's about?" And then it made so much sense as I started reading. As I was reading, I was just thinking about is the issue that people just don't care about the pursuit of truth or truth in general, or is it that we just lack so much intellectual humility that we cannot fathom we could be wrong or not know truth? And so I love just your guys' discussion there. How do we get people to come to the table to have these fruitful disagreements for the pursuit of truth, open up that we could be fallible? How do we get people to get to the table?
Well, I think it helps that people had your reading habits, which is to say to take the life of the mind very seriously. I mean, you read Shakespeare and Dante and Goethe and Toni Morrison and William Faulkner, you will be humbled. Or if you listen to John Coltrane and some Mozart and Beethoven and Chopin and Curtis Mayfield, and we haven't even got to Hank Williams because I know my dear brother Robbie is a serious banjo player. I mean, but we're talking about art, at its deep and highest levels. But I think in addition to that, and this is why CLT is very important, that you have to have examples. You have to have fleshified, concretized examples of people who are committed to the life of the mind and all of the consequences. Anybody committed to that life of the mind is going to take a number of different political and ideological manifestations. A lot of different religious ones. Our Hindu brothers and sisters like Gandhi are going to disagree with Christians like Robbie and myself. But it's that kind of example. We're living in a moment of such spiritual decay and moral decadence that it looks as if Thrasymachus wins over Socrates. It looks as if Pontius Pilate wins over Jesus. It looks as if Bull O'Connor wins over Martin Luther King Jr. But this is history. This is not just America. This is This is who we are as a human beings. We're a wretched species. We talk about this in the book, right? But we're also wonderful. And we have possibility. We have potential. Do we have the courage to love? Do we have the courage to think critically? Do we have the courage to hope? Well, reading makes a difference. Reflection makes a difference. Wrestling with great art makes a difference.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You know, Katie, one of the one of the things about human beings, one of the um, constants about human nature is this: we tend to fall in love with our opinions, whatever they are. Another thing is we tend to be very tribal,
Mm.
right? We want to fit in, we want to be accepted, we want to be part of the group. And sometimes tribal membership is based to a considerable extent on the sharing of opinions. And then when you dissent from those opinions, you place your status, your position in the tribe in doubt or even in jeopardy. And we human beings don't like that. We don't want to be excluded from groups that are important to us. But if you're going to be a truth seeker, if you're going to fulfill that critical part of your nature as a human being, as a rational being, then you're going to have to risk being made an outsider because you dissent from the tribe's opinion. You're going to have to learn to yield even cherished, deeply held, identity forming opinions when they cannot stand up to rational scrutiny. Another way I sometimes put it, I put it in the book with Cornel, is that we human beings tend to wrap our emotions more or less tightly around our convictions. Now, that's not bad in itself. In fact, in itself, it's a pretty good thing, because unless we have some emotional investment in our convictions, they will just be bare convictions that don't motivate us to do anything. Not just pursue great causes of justice and human rights, but even, get the kids up and dressed and fed and off to school in the morning. It's one thing to think, oh, what a good idea it would be to get the kids up and off to school in the morning. It's another thing to actually have the emotional investment in the belief that enables you to get the kids up, rouse them out of bed, get them to breakfast, dress them up, get them on, clean them up, and get them off to school. And for sure, the same is true if we're talking about great causes of justice and human rights. So there's nothing wrong with emotionally investing in your convictions. You should do that. But if you wrap your emotions too tightly around your conviction, this can happen to any of us. We fall into dogmatism. We become ideologues. We wall ourselves off from criticism, which ensures that we will be locked into whatever the falsehoods are that we happen to believe at any particular point. And they may be very, very tragic falsehoods, which is why we have to be open to challenge, even challenge to our deepest, most cherished identity forming opinions. We have to be willing to say, and this takes courage. Cornel stresses this absolutely rightly. We have to be open to the possibility that we could be wrong, not only on the minor, trivial, superficial things in life, but we could be wrong on the big, important questions, the questions of human nature, the human good, human dignity, human rights, human destiny, the great existential, moral, and religious questions. You need a certain kind of openness there. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be a person of conviction. That doesn't mean you shouldn't act on your convictions. Cornel and I both act on our convictions. Brother Cornel gets himself thrown in jail from time to time for acting on his convictions.
And the first phone call to bail me out is Brother Robbie.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm always there with the check, ready to go.
I said, oh, no, I'm all right, but I appreciate the love. I appreciate the love, though, brother.
But, we have to be willing to make sacrifices for our convictions. So you can see that it's a kind of complicated story. You have to emotionally invest enough to be a person of conviction and to act for the sake of what you believe is right, what you believe is just, what you believe is true, and at the same time have an openness to the possibility that you might be wrong, which means a willingness to be challenged.
Love that. Dr. West, you referenced a minute ago Katie's reading habits, which is a fun CLT fact. Katie reads over 100 books a year in a company where people read a lot of books. And so we've had this debate from time to time. Some of these giants that are dearly loved in the classical renewal movement, which is where CLT kind of lives and breathes, But many of these giants, maybe from Socrates, we could make this case, or to Thomas Aquinas, that in their own day, they were not really known as conservatives. Today, they're dearly loved by conservatives, and maybe more so than by progressives. But in their own day, they weren't conceived of in that manner. I love to hear you each kind of comment on that, on how over time, as the tradition processes, whose work is going to stand the test of time. If they're, and I'm also curious, Dr. George, I love how you said in the book, Cornel is such a student of, the conservative intellectual tradition. Have you become equally more of a student of progressive tradition?
Well, I'll say a quick word and then turn it over to Cornel, because he's the person whose opinion here is really worth hearing on this question, I'll tell you. I think it was George McGovern, Cornel, back in 1972 when he was running for president and he was being attacked by the Nixon campaign for being a radical and an extremist. And he said, you know what a conservative is? A conservative is a worshiper of dead radicals. The conservatives today praise Thomas Jefferson.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's there's a certain amount of truth. There's a certain amount of truth in that.
That's
No question about
interesting.
it. But Jeremy made mention to a point that I made. I'll say this for our viewership and listeners. A point that I made in the book, and I've made often as Cornel and I have gone around the country. It's something that people, whether they're progressives or conservatives, don't know about Cornel West. There's a lot people don't know about Cornel West. And a lot of people have a lot of misimpressions about Cornel West. But let me tell you something you might not know about Cornel West. There is no conservative scholar, including me, there's no conservative scholar in this country who understands and appreciates the conservative tradition of moral and political philosophy, as well as Cornel West does. If we're talking about Edmund Burke, if we're talking about Eric Voegelin, if we're talking about Leo Strauss, Cornel understands and appreciates the works of all of those figures and loves nothing more than to discuss them. If you want a place where you'll always find Cornel West, that's at the Voegelin meeting held in association with the American Political Science Association convention every year. There are a lot of conservatives these days who don't even know who Eric Voegelin was, one of the most important conservative thinkers in the modern period. Lived roughly from the early 1900s. When did Voegelin die, Cornel? Probably in the 60s or 70s. Yeah.
I think Voegelin died about night. Well, we got him right here, though.
Oh, there he is. But a lot of conservatives these days wouldn't even know who he is, and yet Cornel knows his work inside out.
1985.
1985. Okay.
No, but
so
yes,
Cornel's not a progressive because he doesn't understand or appreciate what conservatives have said. He's a progressive despite the fact that he's taken on board and appreciates the powerful arguments, but he sees more powerful arguments on the conservative side. Now, I'm in the opposite place, but I appreciate work in the liberal or left tradition in the same way that Cornel appreciates work on the conservative side. So, for example, while I've made much of my career as a critic of the liberalism of figures like John Locke and especially John Stuart Mill, figures like that, I have a great appreciation for their John Rawls, who was one of Cornell's teachers. A lot of my early work was really the work that got me tenure and promotion at Princeton and so forth was largely devoted to criticism of John Rawls. And that's not because I think John Rawls was an idiot. He was the opposite of an idiot. He was a deep and profound thinker. I happened to come out in a different place. I think I see some places where he went wrong quite crucially. But I appreciate the man's many important contributions, and no one has caused me to deepen my thinking as much as Rawls had, with the possible exception of Cornel West.
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far, my brother. But I remember spending those wonderful moments in John Rawls's living room with Anne, his beloved wife, and he was a giant. Oh my God. He was wrong about a number of things, but he was a giant, no doubt, no doubt. But Robbie knows that Voegelin has a wonderful line in the volume 3 of Order and History. I think it's about page 91, where he says Gorgias is the death sentence over Athens. And he was talking about Callicles. Callicles and this is in Vogler's language, he was an intellectual pimp who would look you in the face and call for the murder of your mother tomorrow. Now that's
Yeah.
not just Stalin and and Hitler and company. We're talking about Athens, and we're talking about what it means for might to make right, and for power to dictate morality, and for character to be so flattened out that life is just simply manipulation and transaction and domination, you see. And Vogelin, like the great Leo Strauss and like the great Gadamer, who I was blessed to study with for a year, and we can go on and on. These are just profound truth seekers, no matter where they came down politically. It's like Bruckner in classical music. He's deeply Catholic and conservative. He sounds powerful. Beethoven's a revolutionary politically. He's deeper than Bruckner, but Bruckner is profound, and his music is to be appreciated as a conservative Catholic. Beethoven, secular, Freemason, still got something to say in his music. And we can go the same thing. Zora Neale Hurston as our brilliant black sister, towering figure, conservative in so many deep ways, different than Toni Morrison. Oh my God, we got Sister Toni here too.
Here she is.
So that it's if we confine ourselves in narrow categories of politics, we're going to miss out on so much rich humanity, and we're not here that long. But one last point about reading, though, Sister Katie, because reading is so crucial, but in so many ways, rereading becomes sometimes even more important. You know what I mean? If you reread Plato's Apology, you reread Brothers Karamazov, you reread War and Peace, you reread Hamlet, reread King Lear, reread Invisible Man, we go third and fourth and fifth times. That's what Strauss, that's what Vogelin, that's what so many of these powerful thinkers do. Not just the conservatives, but the Sheldon Wolins, who was a great colleague of Robbie and my dear thesis advisor, who was deeply committed to Athens and Jerusalem legacies, but was a deeply, what would you say, Robbie? Left wing to the core.
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, he was very far to the left, but deeply appreciated the classical tradition, and it encouraged me in my work, even though he knew I was in a very different place.
I love how you use the analogy of jazz. Jazz is an innately innovative genre of music, but it would have never been innovated had you not known the history and what had come before it in music. We're kind of getting to this point right now in this conversation, but would just love to hear you talk a little bit more about why tradition matters, why classics matter, why do all of these thoughts matter, even if we do want to see change from where we are today. Why should we look to these old voices?
Brother Robbie, you want to jump in, or should I jump in,
Well,
my dear sister?
let me just begin with jazz. Of course,
Absolutely.
I'm a bluegrass musician, as Cornell pointed out a few minutes ago. I'm a bluegrass banjo player, came by
Superb
it honestly,
artist.
born and brought up in the hills of West Virginia.
That was
But
the highlight of COVID, Dr. George. Every day you got on Twitter and you played bluegrass for us. It was like,
I tried to keep people's spirits up. I mean, how can you be sad hearing banjo music, right? So I was giving us a banjo minute every day, 66 banjo minutes during COVID. No, so let me talk a little about jazz because I appreciate jazz. So take the most innovative contemporary jazz artist. You choose who you consider to be your most innovative one. If you sit down with that person, something you are very, very likely to hear, if you ask that person, well, like, who is your most important, who most importantly influenced you? On whose work do you most rely? How did you get to where you are? You know what that person's going to say? Louis Armstrong. Now, Louis Armstrong sounds ancient. It doesn't sound nearly as complicated and as contemporary, innovative jazz music. But what the most innovative players are relying on at the foundation of their work and their creativity is the work of a figure like Louis Armstrong. Turn over to my genre, to bluegrass. Bela Fleck is the most innovative contemporary banjo player, by far, no question about it. He came to Princeton. He gave us a wonderful concert a couple of years ago. And about halfway through the concert, when he gave a little homily, finally, after playing a number of tunes, he talked a little bit about his music. His very first words in that homily were, "I am a disciple of Earl Scruggs." Earl Scruggs, the founder of bluegrass banjo playing. Someone whose work today, by contrast to what you hear in Bela Fleck, would seem very basic, very simple, very conservative, if you will. But there is no Bela Fleck without Earl Scruggs. And for Bela Fleck to be Bela Fleck, he has to root himself in the work of Earl Scruggs. So that's just a musical example. We can apply the same thing to the intellectual life.
Absolutely. And I think one of the greatest examples in my own life has been this brother right here,
There he is.
T.S. Eliot. And of course, Robbie and I spend so much time talking about four quartets and Ash Wednesday and Wasteland and the essays on F.H. Bradley and so on. And you all see that throughout the text, because T.S. Eliot is somebody who understood he was living in a moment of catastrophe. And that catastrophe was spiritual, it was political, it was economic, it was social, and he had to fall back on the voices of the dead. Now, the anthem of Black people was lift every voice, not lift every echo. He was looking for voices to do what? To help him find his voice. I was just with Reggie Workman last night. He played the bass for John Coltrane live in Village Vanguard in 61 and Africa Brass in 61. He's 88 years old. We spent 3 hours together. We had a political event here in Harlem. And he was reflecting on what Coltrane meant to him. Eliot falling back on John Donne, falling back on Dante, falling back on those thinkers that would empower him, but just not him, but for others to gain access to deal with the catastrophe. Well, of course, I mean, history of Black folks dealing with slavery, catastrophe, Jim Crow, catastrophe, hatred, terror, trauma, catastrophe, how we're going to affirm our humanity and our sense of love, hope, and thinking critically in the face of catastrophe. We look at those great examples. Now, Eliot's going to land in a place politically where I'm far removed, but I don't exist without Eliot, just like I don't exist without Martin King. I don't exist without Malcolm X. I don't exist without Reverend Cook, who baptized me in Shiloh Baptist Church. I don't exist without Mahalia Jackson. And at this point, I don't exist without Robbie. I don't exist without Anna Heath. I want to get my wife in there too, but my kids. But all of these people have been poured into us to deal with deep crises. And you have these exemplary figures like an Eliot or a Faulkner or Sheldon Wolin and so forth, who help us, but we all have to do it in our own way, our own voice. Katie's voice, Jeremy's voice, Brother Robbie's voice, distinctive, just like the fingerprints.
I want to give a special shout out to Brent Dickinson, the newest member of the CLT Board of Academic Advisors. We're honored to have you both, of course. And Brent, unlike the majority, of course, of our board members, actually he would put himself on the far left, and describe himself as a communist, Marxist, anarchist. But he is a deep student of the tradition, and he was the first to make the case to me that conservatives and progressives really need each other to have a flourishing society, that there should always be folks fighting to maintain the very best elements of our culture, and there should be folks poking at what are those elements that we ought to fight to retain. I'd love to hear you both, as a final question here, speak about, do we need both for a flourishing society, and if so, how?
Absolutely, we do. And the way I've put it is that the health of our polity depends on there being at least one healthy party of conservation and at least one healthy party of reform. And what worries me is we don't seem to have either a healthy party of conservation or a healthy party of,
That is well said.
of reform. But we really do need them. I mean, sometimes the right answer is, we need reform on this issue or in that area. Sometimes the right answer is we need to conserve what we've got, and the calls for change or reformation are misguided. But our best chance at ending up in a good place where the genuine common good is preserved and advanced is when we're in a situation where we've got a Gladstone and a Disraeli, when we've got leadership that represents a strong and healthy party of reform, but also a strong and healthy party of conservation. And by party, I don't necessarily mean just political party. I mean an ideological or political movement, a kind of, broadly speaking, a school or tradition of thought.
Absolutely. But I just think that variety is something that's so built into who we are as human beings. We never escape the challenge of the one and the many. When I was there in Charlottesville with some very, very sick white brothers and neo-Nazis and the Klan with their guns and with their masks and so forth, and they coming at me tooth and nail and saying, well, how come you call everybody brother? I said, because I'm a free man, brother. And I said, God loves you just like God loves me. Then I got real evangelical. I said, Jesus died for you, man, just like Jesus died for me. You choosing to be a gangster. I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So that our humanity.
You say that in the book. I love that line.
Exactly. And I say that in an evangelical way when people are coming at me. That's why people are upset when I say Brother Trump. How can you call Trump a brother? He's your foe. He's your enemy. Yes, he is my enemy. Somewhere I read that you love your enemies. You stay in contact with their humanity because God loves them. And there were a time in which you were the enemy of God. And God loved you enough to work it through. But it's also being true to ourselves, though. And this is what is crucial, you see. That there's no that when I walked by those brothers, they were listening to Motown. They were listening to black music. So if they were true, they don't want to crush me when my folk helped produce, if not thoroughly produce, Motown music. What are we talking about here, right? And this is true across the board. If you like Robert Frost's poetry, it's powerful. He's a right-wing social Darwinian, but that poetry is powerful. Gwendolyn Brooks' poetry is going to hit you hard, but she's radically left, just like that brother Brent. And so you have to be true to your own experiences. And when you're true to your own experiences, you are actually moved deeply by people who have a lot of different political views because that's part of life.
No, there's more than 1,000 classical schools now, classical Christian schools, classical charter. I want to pass along the strongest recommendation to do this as schools. I think for seniors getting ready to go off to college, I can't think of a better book that I would recommend to think about how they're going to engage. Often on campuses where folks coming from classical Christian schools are certainly kind of in a minority position. I'm wondering if you're optimistic right now. I think things have gotten so bad. Maybe I think, as you say, Dr. George, as bad as they've been since the Civil War in terms of our inability to speak to one another, to listen well. Have we hit rock bottom? Are you seeing signs to be optimistic about that we're going to recover some level of civil dialogue?
Well, hope is much more important than optimism. Hope is a virtue. Optimism is really at best a prediction, a sunny prediction. So I'm always hopeful. We're commanded biblically to be hopeful. Hope is a virtue. It's one of the great theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. So yes, I'm hopeful, but I also think there are some grounds for optimism. There's been something of a vibe shift, especially in the free speech area, the willingness of people to actually speak out when they dissent from a tribal opinion rather than censor themselves. The willingness of people to be a little more open to hearing even their most fundamental, their most cherished beliefs challenged. And that's good. Now, could that reverse again? Yeah, it certainly could. Are we at rock bottom? No, it could be worse. We could fall into a worse situation as far as free speech is concerned, not just as a legal doctrine you're legally permitted to speak freely. I mean culturally, where people are actually willing and feel that they are able to speak freely without being victims of cancellation campaigns or having their lives or careers ruined or their families attacked and things like that. So I think we're in a pretty good place right now. I want to keep the momentum going in that direction. Um, I want to take this opportunity, though, since you mentioned, Jeremy, the classical schools, to say that I now have enough experience over almost 2 decades. I've been in academic life for about 4 decades. For the last two, I've had students at Princeton from classical schools, often Christian classical schools, sometimes non-sectarian classical schools. And boy, am I impressed. These students are extraordinary. Some of the very best students we get are from classical schools. Now, in a certain way, you would say, well, that shouldn't be surprising. You're challenging students with the best that has been thought and said throughout our history. Of course, they're going to be great students. But there's a certain, prejudice against classical education. There's certainly a prejudice against Christian classical education associated with evangelicalism and so forth. And it's hard not to fall into, accepting some of that prejudice. But boy, it disappears fast when you actually meet the students that I've met and have had the privilege to teach who come from classical schools. They are off the charts good. And now they're, of course, going on to the great graduate programs and into wonderful careers. A lot of my own students go to law school. Some of my students from classical school backgrounds have gone on to the top law schools and then on to the top clerkships and clerked at the Supreme Court of the United States and have gone into brilliant legal careers. So the evidence is now in. The classical schools are a success.
Yeah, Dr. George, I think those words are going to mean the world to so many heads of schools, folks that have given their life, their sanity, everything to bring this tradition to the next generation when it had almost been kind of snuffed out entirely.
Well, let me say one more word about it, which I hope will also be encouraging to teachers and administrators in the classical schools, the leaders of the classical schools, and to parents. Not only are these kids exceptionally well educated, they have the correct attitude toward learning. They are not ideologues. They are not dogmatists. Many of them are conservatives. Many of them are conservative Christians. But they are open to being challenged. They recognize they have something to learn from people who disagree with them, as well as perhaps something to teach those who disagree with them. That attitude of openness to learning and to following the logos and to following the argument when it leads, that's one of the best features of these young men and women from the classical schools.
No, and I think it's important to lay out the why these particular schools are having the impact that they're having, because I think where we are in the culture, in the country, that spiritual sickness that I was talking about, that civic cowardliness, and the rampant hedonism that these schools provide, these platoons, to use Burke's language, they provide platoons over against so much of the hedonism and over against so much of the narrow careerism. And once you unleash Plato and Plutarch and Sophocles and Lucian on the world, or when you unleash Amos and Esther and the New Testament on the world, or you unleash King's letter from a Birmingham jail, or you all this unleashing of Virginia Woolf and so forth, and then it spills over to Chilbay. We can go on with Gandhi and what have you in relation to John Ruskin and Henry David Thoreau. That even though at the moment it looks as if so many of the young folk are conservative Christians, they know in the end it's hard to be on Pontius Pilate's payroll if you're a follower of Jesus. So that critical energy, that Socratic energy, is just there, and it's not containable. And that's one of the reasons why education is always a battlefield, spiritually, intellectually, politically, and because we're so politicized, we miss out on the movement of spirit. You remember Russell Kirk says at the very last chapter of Conservative Mind that conservatism is the regeneration of spirit and character. of spirit and character with its morality and spirituality. And see, once you accept that, it's a whole new world with all kind of different political conflict and ideological conflict. But it's character, it's integrity, it's honesty, it's decency, it's courage at the center. And that's a different level of living. It really is.
You know, Jeremy, in some ways, one might think that a book like our book, like a book like Truth Matters, the people who need it least would be students in the classical schools because they're already getting the stuff that Cornell and I are calling for. But at another level, it seems to me that it would be especially valuable for students in classical schools because it will be such a profound encouragement to them. And it will help them to build on things they already know, and it'll help them to understand the significance and importance of the kind of education that they are receiving. So I do hope it gets a wide readership among students in classical schools. And I say students as well as faculty administrators, because the book, as you know, since you've read it, is pitched at a level where it doesn't presuppose that you already have a college education. We have Adam Bello to thank, our publisher, to thank for that in large measure, because Adam required us to explain concepts or identify who certain figures are that we cite. If we cite Hegel, Adam said, "Okay, now tell the students who Hegel was and what he believed and why he was important." Or if there's a school of thought that Epicureanism or something like that, Adam made us explain what that school of thought held. So it's accessible, certainly to high school students, especially to well-trained classical school high school students. So I hope it gets a wide readership among them. I think it will be helpful to them and to their parents.
So
Would love to finish up. We always end the Anchored podcast with asking what has been the most formative or influential book in your life. If you have one that's a little bit more geared towards fruitful disagreement, you can go that route as well. But we'd love to hear that.
So one book recommendation, that'd be great.
Wow, just one book, Robbie. That's a tough one. That's a tough, and we exclude the rich biblical text, I guess, huh?
We always say if you go to the Bible, you need to recommend a book to focus on in the Bible.
Yeah. What do you think, Brother Robbie?
Oh, it's an easy one for me, Cornell, as you know. Yeah.
Oh, I think I have an idea what it is. The
What's he
life
gonna say?
transforming book.
That's the life transforming book, the
We
book
going
that
back to
changed everything
Athens
in my
here.
life, put me on the track that I'm on, enabled me to discern my vocation as a scholar and a teacher. That book was Plato's Gorgias. It fundamentally transformed my life, made me think about issues for the first time in my life, where I wasn't just echoing some sort of line that I'd picked up from the culture or from my tribe or my party or my group. It was the work that made me see the importance of thinking for myself, indeed of thinking my way to conclusions rather than just adopting my conclusions because, for tribal reasons, essentially, or things like that. It was a liberating book, an intimidating one in some ways, when all of a sudden you have to start thinking for yourself, and all of a sudden you realize you've got to put all your previous beliefs on the table, all the beliefs you currently hold on the table, because you really haven't reasoned your way to them, and you don't know where you're going to end up once you subject them to those beliefs to scrutiny. So it was, in a certain sense, a terrifying experience, but it was also an exhilarating experience, and it made all the difference in my life. So if you ask me the question, what's the most influential book in your life? It's an easy one, Plato's Gorgias.
See, it's interesting you go back to our pagan brother here, huh?
Yeah.
As a Christian, that's very important. People need to recognize the riches of different traditions outside of our own tradition. That's why we always pluralize, you know what I mean? You contextualize and pluralize because all of us are hybrids. All of us have a variety of different traditions that have been poured into us. If I were to go back to the text that probably introduced me to the life of the mind at the highest level. It would be in the bookmobile way out on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California. It was still kind of Jim Crowish, so it was hard to gain access to a lot of the libraries. But they had these bookmobiles used to go out to the black community. And I used to read all the books in the bookmobile. That's where that rereading comes in, Sister Katie. Is I would reread out biographies of Einstein, reread. But the text that I was rereading more than anything else was Kierkegaard's journals. And it was a Walter Low translation where you had a variety of, you had parts from works of love. You had parts from philosophical fragments, parts from unscientific postscript. And you also had the Kierkegaard's conception of what it really meant to be a human being and a Christian, but take seriously the challenges of Socrates and Hegel, the so-called pagan and secular thinkers. But as I grew older, it turned out to be Chekhov. And I ask every student, please just read his favorite short story, The Student, that we mention in the books. Just 2.5 pages. Just reread it about every 6 months just to keep yourself honest. Because it is about as profound as they come. And it's very much about a seminary student and the past, present, and future connected, the centrality of tradition and the centrality of voice, and most importantly, the centrality of love, compassion, and humility in a world that's so cold and so cruel.
When Cornel and I have taught together, the text from Kierkegaard we've used is either or.
Yeah,
which is powerful. Another text that has been so influential with our students when we've done our teaching together is Sophocles' Antigone. And we usually begin, I think in almost every case, we've begun with Sophocles' Antigone. It gets so many of the important issues, the existential issues, out onto the table. Now you're getting me going. Another one that has had such a big impact on our students is St. Augustine's Confessions.
Oh, yes.
Everybody should read. And it doesn't matter whether you're Christian or not, everybody should read St. Augustine's Confessions. Gosh, and on. Once you get us started here.
John Henry Newman had that impact. The idea of the university. Who would have thought our students would be so hungry for that?
When we selected that text, that time we did it in our seminar, when we selected that text, I was so afraid that the students would be put off by it, that they wouldn't really get into it because, the language is so Baroque and it seemed to be from another time, a time that's long past and another culture long gone. But gosh, did the students resonate. It was John Henry Newman's book, The Idea of a University. Now, after the fact, I could explain it. After the fact, I could see by the students' reaction to it that it was having such a powerful impact on the students because it was making them think about the very thing they were engaged in now. Getting a liberal arts education. What does it mean to be an educated person? What's the point of getting an education? So now I can explain it, but I was very nervous about using that text. I just wasn't sure that it would resonate with them, but my goodness, it did.
You share such a sweet story in the book where a student, I believe a girl actually came to belief, came to conversion as a new Christian through the class, through your conversations, and asked you, Dr. George, to be a confirmation sponsor, but you both went. I believe it's a cathedral in New Jersey
in Trenton, New Jersey.
In Trenton, New Jersey. How beautiful. I was thinking about the Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas, where you had, the people, it wasn't necessarily the goal, but exposing them to the fire of the tradition, getting them to open their minds and open their hearts as well, led to these greater things. We're here with two giants again, national treasures, truly, the one and only Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Robbie P. George. The book is Truth Matters. It's a crucial read. It's a short read. It's a conversation. It's about 180 pages, but it reads quick, and it is just so enjoyable. You get a sense on every page of your very genuine love for each other, your love for this tradition. So thank you both. Thank you, Katie Prefontaine, for joining us for this conversation. This has been a real joy.
This is a joy for us.
Thank you, Katie.
Indeed, God bless you all. God bless your precious family. But this is marvelous. It really is. You all stay strong.
you.